It is now starting to record. I want to welcome you to another one of our weekly Wins in Our events made possible by the generous support of the Edinburgh University Student Government Association, by the Art Department, and also by Erie Arts and Culture. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to give yourself the speaker view in this Zoom. And also, if you would silence your phone, and unless you're a speaker, go ahead and mute the microphone. And the thing I wanted to tell you a little bit is that, like many of the faculty working here at Edinburgh University in this century-old art department, I knew of the existence of a permanent collection. But until I was handed the keys to the Doucette Hall storage area last August, I really had no idea what it was. Initiated back in the 50s, the collection was created to benefit students, faculty, alumni, and the wider regional community. But the act of researching and programming the collection requires time and money. And during a normal academic year, those resources are really spent programming the gallery exhibitions. But as COVID has upended our lives and our plans, it's created a strange opportunity for reflection. And as the director of the gallery, I've been working with students Madison Eggleston, Anthony Ferris, Alexander Hare, Rachel Malley, and Erica Spade, and many colleagues to really come to sort of celebrate this collection. And today's event, the first in a 5-part series, will be, I hope, a beginning to that celebration. I have questions. What is actually in the collection? Why do we have it? What should we add to the collection? Should we let anything go? And while we're responsible for it, how can we use it wisely for the greatest good? Edinburgh University's art professor, Dr. Charlotte H. Wellman, knows the collection very well. She served on the Bruce Gallery board for many years, and she has guided me in the creation of this project, which is titled Illuminating the Collection, a contemporary examination of the Bruce Gallery's permanent collection series. Now, Dr. Wellman, an associate professor of art history here at Edinburgh, teaches courses on modern and contemporary art, photography, gender, and theory. And she's collaborated with many contemporary artists, resulting in publications on Gary Spinoza's visionary sculpture, Kathy Kowalski's photographs, and her special focus is on the intersection of gender, aging, and the visual arts. Now, Dr. Wellman first acquainted me with the work of Kalila Luckett, a Pittsburgh-based art historian, curator, and writer. With over 20 years of experience in arts administration and cultural production, she's committed to elevating the voices of underrepresented visual artists, specifically women and Black and Brown artists. Luckett is also the founding executive director and chief curator of Alma Lewis, named after abstract artists Alma Thomas and Norman Lewis. This is an experimental contemporary art space for critical thinking, dialogue, and creative expression dedicated to Black culture. She recently served as an art commissioner for the City of Pittsburgh's Art Commission for 12 years, and from 2018 to 2020, she was the consulting curator of visual arts at the August Wilson Center, an African-American cultural center. She's currently writing an authorized biography on Naomi Sims, one of the first Black supermodels. Now, Luckett has been commissioned to organize this 5-part series with an aim of engaging the university community and regional audiences around the artistic strength and rich cultural vision, or value really, not a vision so much, of the art collection. And so with that, I want to turn the event over completely now to Kalila Luckett, and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. And Lisa, thank you so much for inviting me to be in just fellowship with you and Charlotte and Rachel and so many wonderful people at Edinburgh. You have such a wonderful gem in your collection in the Bruce Gallery. So thank you so much for inviting me to help put together this series. So I'm really excited about it. And I've already had so many great conversations with you all, and I've learned so much about this hidden gem of your collection, which I'll be diving into with Dr. Charlotte Wellman. But before we get started, I just kind of want to give some context to this evening and how we're going to kind of go through this wonderful presentation that Dr. Wellman, which I'll call you Charlotte, and I have put together based on images or artwork from the collection. And then also, I just wanted to let people know that in the chat, we put the website, the web link to the Bruce Gallery, which is brucegallery.info. So you can check out what's going on with the Bruce Gallery and all the wonderful things happening. And then also, as we go along, I invite people to post questions or put comments in the chat, and then I'll be reading them and I will then go through them and say them out loud so we can further engage. All right. So this evening, we are going to be talking, Charlotte and I are going to be in conversation about certain art objects in Edinburgh's collection. And you all have over 400 objects, right? And counting. And I would like Charlotte to talk a little bit about the collection because you have such an in-depth knowledge. You've had some of your former students engage with the collection. And then we'll talk a little bit about the kind of title for this evening's conversation, which is visual narratives. So, Charlotte?
Sure. We've just chosen 6 objects to talk to you about tonight, and this is just the tip of an iceberg. Very teeny tiny tip. We have 366 works on paper in the permanent collection. In addition to that, we have, I'd say, about a dozen works of ceramics, including a work by Ed Eberly, and in addition to that, a piece by Peter Vulkos. It's a very significant figure in ceramic art. We also have a number of objects, textiles and ethnographic objects in the collection. The largest of our collections are, of course, the works on paper. And the earliest pieces that we have are wood engravings by James Bewick, who is a British printer. And the most recent ones, I really want to give a shout out to Egress Press, which is a press that is seated in the art department. We boast master printers among our faculty who've worked with visiting artists for the past 20 years to produce print series. And this is very much not only drawn in our faculty, but also the students in the print area. Most recently, our 2 graduate students that I would mention, Henry Gepfer and Marco Sanchez. I don't know if either of them are present in our group today or not, but it is very much a creative and collaborative effort. And we have a number of those prints as part of our permanent collection.
Great. All right. So we can get into this. I'm going to share my screen and we will begin our wonderful conversation. And this is going to be like a back and forth because it's been so wonderful to be in conversation with you, Charlotte. I mean, I've learned so much. I feel like I'm back in school all over again. And which was back in the 90s. But just like where we are in contemporary times and how art is just so informative in helping us just to think critically about who we are as human beings and citizens of the world. And so just drawing from this collection and putting some of these works into context, into a larger conversation, I just find just so invigorating. So thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to it too. It's been a wonderful opportunity to prepare for this too, and to share ideas and finish each other's sentences, and to be in the presence of another art historian has just been a delight.
Great. All right, so let's jump right in here. So the title of our conversation this evening is called Visual Narratives, and this title is borrowed from your seminar that you're teaching this semester.
Yes.
Right. And so you just talk a little bit about what you mean, what visual narratives really kind of means. And I can talk a little bit about that as well, but just as far as, just the idea of like, what do we mean when we say visual narratives?
Well, one of the things I really try to stress when I run a seminar is that I'm drawing together students from a range of different areas, working in a range of media, but all of them seeking to communicate. It's urgent that as makers and interpreters of visual images, that we define exactly how artists need to narrate differently than people who are in the word and text business. Not that the two do not intersect, they certainly do. We are looking at a print right now that draws a word and image together, but they do so using very particular strategies that we seek to reach by looking at different cultural frameworks that have been deployed in order to create images, from ekphrasis to Asian scrolls. But then, looking at the history of the grid and modernism, but also stretching to the present moment and to the articulation of graphic novels and how those also serve as vehicles for narration. Installation, as we see here, this is where Kilolo is going to join the seminar later in the semester and talk to us about the action of installation and how that imposes a narrative on a given object and sequence of objects. And the path of narrative when you do that can be very fluid and ever-changing. So that's what these men are suffering through as they try to reckon with each other over whether or not smashing their works together in a salon-style presentation is a good thing or a not so good thing.
And I love that we open with this image by Henri Daumier, who is this French artist, just provocateur, and in the mere fact that these salon style installations, these art fairs, this was like the originator of like art fairs that we know of it today. And also this whole idea of, I just want to take a little step backwards about this visual narratives, because I know that sometimes people think about narratives in this kind of linear way, and we tend to kind of box ourselves in. We get so caught up into like these binaries of like, okay, linear, there has to be this procession, this progression of chronological order, but it takes so many different forms. And so I feel like this is such a wonderful visual, way of articulating, conveying that. But also there is this, we can translate the French text, the caption at the bottom. But I feel like the image itself speaks so powerfully about what is taking place, the activities taking place in this illustration. So that's just one thing I just wanted to point out. And that, I feel like in where we are, like with social media, and there's just this, cacophony of images and sound and video and music, you got TikTok, you got Instagram, all these things. I kind of feel like this image kind of serves as a metaphor for that as well, of all of these things on display and what's going to stand out and what are you going to gravitate towards, and how can you make sense out of, and focus on certain things. So that's something else for me, that this image has such staying power. It's like a classic in a way, for me at least. So.
Yeah, and there's just such a wall full of images all in competition, and yet simultaneously in dialogue.
Yes.
And the dialogue isn't linear, as you say. It makes your eye constantly move over that surface, selecting, juxtaposing, contrasting, comparing, weighing the merits of one against another. This is very, very much kind of like the precursor of the social media references that you're making, Kilolo. Yeah, this man is not happy with where they have stuck his picture, but then he tries to find the silver lining, and he looks up to the masterwork directly above it and says, "At least I'm near somebody famous," you know. So they're going to look at that, and then, oh, I might be lucky enough for their eye to stray down to my small little niche. Yeah, it's and the
Yeah.
pack. You know how I often go to openings and think, nobody's looking at the art. They're eating the little hors d'oeuvres and they're engaging in conversations, connections about art. And you can just see them packed in here like sardines, just this wall of hats. And
Which
people,
I miss that. I miss going to art openings.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Something else also kind of stands out for me with this image is that you have these men that are, it centers these men, right? And then there's this woman in the background, and then there's this man in closest to the paintings. He's trying to get up close to scrutinize what he's looking at, and so there are these different kind of vantage points of people are looking at different things within this frame, and that's kind of like there's this chaos happening, so once again, that's just one of the brilliant things of Daumier, and his critique, his social critique. He had a lot of different commentaries about society, what was going on in France, even his wonderful illustrations in the newspaper about the King Louis, which he used to draw in the form of a pear king, the shape of a pear king. So
Yes, they called him the pair.
yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And that happens today, so beyond just, the cartoons. So shall we move on to the next image? Here we go. Yes. So the image on the right is just, 1787 salon exhibition. That's like a big art fair, and things might have changed. And this is at the Louvre, but things have changed, but some things have stayed the same as well. Because I think there's more art fairs now than ever, and it's pretty global for the most part. But it's interesting to see almost 100 years, has gone by. Almost 100 years has gone by from this one illustration by Pietro Martini, and then the one on your left with Daumier. So, yeah. Is there anything you wanted to share?
Just looking at that, the print on the right, and how it climbs to almost like an altarpiece at the crest. And my memory is that in the salon, there was a hierarchy of who got to have their work where. Yes.
And they tend to be religious paintings too back then as well.
Yeah.
Those were the ones that tend to, the highest to God, to heaven, tended to be up top, the threshold. So the golden threshold. So based on my memory. So, and I mean, now we have, what do you call VIPs, going to these art fairs, and you have the VIP days. Yeah, so there's just so many wonderful analogies that one can make from that 1787 drawing. All right, let's see. All right. So we're transitioning to Francois Gillot, who is still alive. And, I always think about her, and I try to separate the association with Picasso.
Yeah.
Because, when one talks about Picasso and the women, they all tend to flatten.
Yes.
If we're talking about narratives, like where's her story in all of this? Because it tends to get overshadowed by Picasso.
Yes. Yeah, she's completely preempted.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I'm just looking at that birth date, Kalolo. She's just going to be celebrating her 100th birthday.
Yes. In
Yes.
November, apparently. Yes, And this is, once again, this is a beautiful print in your collection. And, when we were looking at which ones to pick, and, I was looking at another one and you're like, hey, how about this one? I'm like, oh my God, yes, 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 yes. And then, I started just talking about what I visually see.
Mhm.
And, she's centering this woman, this elongated neck, but also I feel like she's breaking out of this confinement. And there are, for me, like these different kind of blocks. They're almost for me serving as like, this ceiling, this glass ceiling that she is penetrating, that she is breaking. And kind of like breaking free of like Picasso's gaze. Um, I would love to talk to her about this,
Yeah.
her earlier work. I mean, I know she has a residence in New York and also in Paris. Um,
Yeah, I saw this very much as the fleur, referencing flora, and thinking about muses and goddesses, and how frequently uh, women who are partners and lovers to great men are relegated to that role, and they lose their voices, they lose their names, they lose their agency. And Kalolo and I talked a lot about agency and its intersection with gender and race.
mhm.
I saw this very much as a still life, and the face is one of many bouquets of flowers that are thrust into a translucent vase. But her face rises out of it, almost as if seeking a kind of nourishment from the water, and pushing the flowers aside so that they become an accessory. And she emerges as this kind of, we always talk about in French, the nature morte, the dead nature. That's the word for still life in French, but she animates it. And I think she really takes the notion of the muse and transforms it,
Hmm.
gives it a kind of distinctive quality, really kind of separating it from the anonymity and the handmaiden role that muses were so often called upon to play for uh, masters
Mhm.
like Picasso.
Yes. And that she's staring out at us, engaging us, which is I feel like it's a very strong statement, that she's aware of us, possibly.
Oh, do you think that this is almost kind of like the mosaics or tessera out of which an icon might have been made?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, which gives
Yeah.
her kind of a regal stamp, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, very
Yeah.
much so. And then here's this. We don't think that this is
No.
Gillot. This is just probably a model. But it's just, just showing the mini models of Picasso. But also in the background, there's that bust,
Mm.
an enormous bust of a partial face there. Um, but in some of Picasso's influences of, African art, masks, um, cubism, all that stuff too. We could talk more about that, but I know we have to move along. But then also here is Gillot in her studio among some of her works. Um, and we don't know the date of this, but looks like she's probably in her mid-career, middle age.
Yeah, this is definitely before the amazing New York apartment she snagged in 1990.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's
But you can see she's a very active artist in her own right. And once again, getting back to, we're talking about agency, and, she had her own agency, her own power, her own will to make work outside of her relationship with Picasso. And also the mere fact that, when she left him, he really, really tried to undermine her, tried to bury her career, and told people not to work with her.
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I read that she was the only woman who left him.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
yes, he never forgave her for that. I like how agentic the works on the easel are. There are vigorous, strong women in active dynamic movement. And I think I mentioned they reminded me very much of Nikki de Saint-Phal's Venuses,
Yes.
but just extremely active figure. So again, taking that, and she never wanted her women to be individuals,
Mhm.
and yet she refused the classification of muses as well,
Yeah.
very assertively. And I think that's quite clear when we have several works by her to consider.
Right. And although she has painted these singular figures, I don't feel like they're isolated or alone. And I like that there's this athleticism to them, once again, getting back to their own body and agency over their body. I really enjoy looking at these paintings. So, all right, moving right along.
Something a little different.
For those viewing, watching, I don't know if you all are familiar with Mel Ramos, who's in the collection, of course. This is Manet's Olympia that he, um, you know, was influenced by, Manet's Olympia. But Ramos is very infamously known for, um, depicting women in all sorts of, very much. I really feel that it's just misogyny. There's a lot of misogyny happening in his work. And some people would say, oh, he's of that era, the 50s and 60s. And I said, still, I'm, I still want to critique and interrogate that. But we're going to show in the next slide the actual actual painting of Manet's Olympia. But we wanted to start with Mel, and you all have multiple Mels, right? Ramos, excuse me.
Yes, we have Mel's, and tragically, I have not yet tracked down and laid my eyes on the one with the saucy title about the salami.
Oh, that's right.
Which I don't know. Can we utter that in mixed company over?
There was poetry. There was, poetry.
Holding the salami with Modigliani.
That's right.
Yeah, he liked his saucy titles.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So this image.
So, Kilola, what do you think it is about Manet's Olympia that keeps provoking a range of artists over the course, right up to the present day? They proliferate. What is it about this? I hate to say the word seminal, but this seminal work that seems to provoke so many responses.
And this seminal work is on our right. And I absolutely love Manet. I remember the first time I saw his work, I was just so enamored and questioning what's going on here, especially with his Black subjects in his painting. And so once again, this was back in the 90s, and fast forward, there's now been much more scholarship around the Black subjects in a lot of paintings, in particular Manet and his relationships with the Black subjects in his work. And now we know the names of this one subject, the Black woman in his painting. Her name is Laura, and he used her in several of his works. And then also the woman who is playing Olympia is she's an actress in her own right, and also a courtesan for, high society escort men. And so I feel like what's so provocative and evocative about Manet and in particular Olympia is it's okay. Once again, I mean, there's so much power in this painting for so many reasons. I mean, I know the woman is standing in front of the pet, which is a cat that is a Black cat that's, raised, on the edge of the bed. And while, Laura is presenting these flowers from somebody who Olympia may or may not have already been in service with, which I thought is really interesting because here, Laura is here in service to Olympia, and Olympia is in service to these high society men.
Well, and also quite literally, we are the John.
Right.
Yeah, we are the giver of the bouquet, and she's not pleased with us. I like to tell my students that she is indignant because she, as a sex worker, her time is money.
Mhm.
And any minute that we spend with her without serious intention of paying her for her time is time ill spent as far as she's concerned. So, that notion of the emergence of prostitution as a profession that starts to get the attention of the health services in
Mhm.
France, right?
Yes.
Impressionists paint that
Yes.
interaction, really updates this, the oldest profession, right? Yeah.
Right.
Doreen Moreau
Yeah.
was also an artist herself. She was a painter.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the model is also, being silenced here to a certain degree,
Right.
because she's at the male artist service here.
Right. Right. And that she feels very comfortable in with herself, you
Yes.
know, fully nude.
Quite defiant.
Exactly. Staring out at us, engaging us, daring us.
But
Yeah.
Mel transforms that into something altogether different.
Very much so.
Yes.
I mean, even with the Black servant, her attire is very much um, repeats the attire of the curtain there. Like basically the material is one and the same of what she's wearing and the pulling back of the curtain, which, I was like, what's he trying to say there? And she's
Yeah.
like tilting, off to the side a bit with her body language, almost as if she's almost like nodding. And this whole monkey thing too, you know.
Yeah. Yes, the
Like
animals are significant when you watch people appropriate and modify the Manet original.
Mhm.
The animals play a role. Yeah, I had that same reaction to the way she becomes a backdrop and an accessory simply because the color and the fabric is interchangeable, making again, placing her service as a backdrop to her white employer.
Right. And who is this, blonde bombshell?
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, with a bikini, the pronounced bikini sunburn. Yeah.
Right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. Here, let's move. Oh, sorry. Shall we move on to the next one? So this is the work of Ayana Moore and titled I Love Hip Hop and Hip Hop Loves Me. And this is a work that came out of the Egress Press, right?
Correct.
And Ayana was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and now she's in Chicago at the Art Institute Chicago. She teaches there now. Just want to let people know, like, yes, she's still very much an active artist, and she's a professor. And so, yeah, so this print, and once again, that the title of the work is it runs around this work that's it's like the border. It serves as the border of the red background, just in case anybody is wondering, that's the text that's running around the border. And there are also these male eyes, nose, lips are floating in the background, that says rap, rap head, and floating around. Actually, this is the artist Ayana Moore herself.
Mhm.
So, which I really think is interesting that she's kind of flipping the script.
You betcha.
Right.
So, her backup group, she is the main attraction, and they are playing second fiddle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like an album cover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And typically with these album covers, because Ayana is really critiquing and interrogating, hip hop. And also, once again, like this misogyny that really occurs. And so just how like the hyper real the body parts of women, and women are being reduced to just their body parts, their breasts, their butts. And so she's taking these different aspects of Ben's faces and she's floating them around her head, which I think is just so brilliant. And here we have that work next to this image that we were just talking about, there's a rapper in the center and he has, surrounded himself with all of these, in some of the hip hop and rap interrogation, Ayana talks about the hoes and pimps, that whole idea. And so I just think it, it's just, I love it. I love what she does. And I've seen a lot of other work by Ayana, and I just love her work. So, and I'm so glad it's in your collection. All right, so we have just a few more slides here, people. How's everybody doing? All right, great. Okay, so Bridget Riley. She's British, born in 1931, still alive. And I literally gasped when I saw that you all have this work. You have her in your collection. I gasped and I was like, oh my God, I have a pair of Vans that are, they may have been appropriated by her, but I bought these Vans just because they reminded me of her work. And also that Bridget Riley was like one of the first artists to really advocate for, artists' copyright law. And that's something else that I learned about when I was thinking about learning about artists' copyright. I first learned about Bridget Riley and how, she played a huge role in that. And we have her to thank all the way from Britain. So I just wanted to kind of give some context to the reason why I really, really enjoy Bridget Riley's work, and that I'm just so happy that it's in your collection. And so this piece is called Untitled, Fragment 1. And I forget how many.
There's 7 different images. Yeah, I think I'm right there. Well, the interesting thing about this is it was printed at a commercial printers in London on Perspex, plastic derivative. So kind of very similar to acrylic. So that's interesting. And I also think about the ways in which she takes line and transforms it into a sculptural tool that breaks that picture plane and suggests such literal bending of space that leads us to understand how she really kind of seeks to destabilize us. She doesn't want us to stay firmly planted on the ground. She wants to literally make us feel like dynamic elements, and that our instability in space is being generated and caused by our encounter with her work.
Yeah, this deliberate, intentional disorientation that she's created. And we didn't say the OP word because she was not really fond of how her work was very much, yes, with op art. And, as an art historian, we're always, groomed to think about, once again, in these kind of linear ways of, oh, there's this movement and these artists fit within this movement or movements. And, and it's always like, okay, this happened and then this period happened and following by this period. And once again, as we've talked about, it doesn't really work that way.
Your life is so much more complicated.
Definitely. And here's Bridget earlier in her career, both images. And I just loved, I had to, Charlotte, I had to throw the one on the left in there because I just love how she has her hands on her hips, kind of like that Wonder Woman pose, and she's just totally in full possession of herself. And all of these kind of waves happening behind her. So there's just always this constant movement going on with this work, which she hasn't always worked in this capacity. She's done a lot of different works. But I love that. And then she's also emerging out of her work in the image on the right, but also could be receding as well. And it's just a lot of this dynamic energy happening. And then does anybody know who the guy on the right is? Pittsburgh has this guy's work outside the Carnegie Museum of Art. This is Richard Serra.
But we were talking about how they destabilize the viewer in such fundamentally different ways,
Mm-hmm.
starkly gendered.
Very much so. Yes. I know. And it's funny, like Richard Serra doesn't look like he's so happy to be photographed. He looks a little bit about like a curmudgeon, but I hear he's not like that though, but that's just how the photographer captured him. But, I do love his work, and I feel very small, but very significant walking through when you have the ability to walk through and enter his works. You can't help but not to engage with it, and it almost feels like it's going to be it's going to collapse,
Yeah.
with, on you. And, with Bridget's work, I've never been able to experience anything like what she has, rendered here in this picture on the left. But I would love the opportunity to be able to, be in a space in one of her environments, an installation. I would love to. It'd be so amazing.
Mhm.
All right, so this is our last artist, and I still have not found the correct way to pronounce his name. Hsiang Ning Han. So gave it my best. And he, as well as Bridget, was born in 1931 and still alive. And this was another thing we talked about. Typically, we tend to, learn about artists who are deceased. And we have 4 out of the 6 artists that we selected are all living. So that's another wonderful thing. So this piece is called The New York Skyline from 1981. And if people can see, it almost looks like there's these pixelations, this pixelated print. And once again, this is very intentional. This is of the New York skyline, but there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of things happening in here. And also just want to call to your attention kind of like the shadows that are captured in this print as well. There's kind of like the static, but yet there's this movement, but there's this void of any activity in the water as well.
I was very much aware, looking into him and teaching myself about his career, that he's originally born in China. He comes over to the United States to develop his education and to found his studio. And so he's one of those nomadic artists who has shuttled between Asia and the United States over the course of his lifetime. And to understand that this is so frequently the perspective that immigrants have on Manhattan Island. They sail in to Ellis Island and see Manhattan as an island from the water. It's also a very common early 20th century perspective that early modernists have chosen. And there's something kind of flat and inaccessible about the way he builds this print in strips. And it is highly pixelated. It's he's very kind of on the cusp between that kind of op art. He's connected to Jules Olitsky, who's associated with that movement and who taught him an airbrush technique that he was very fond of using in his paintings. But he's also connected to the photorealist movement. But he's managed somehow to put his Asian heritage, which is on the floor at his feet here in this photograph that opens his website on the right, with that Western tradition of that kind of dot matrix effect that's practiced by both of those groups of artists. So he's got the kind of Chinese landscape painting series that he did, but he did it with that kind of fine dot network that was characteristic of his work. But kind of trying to figure out what relationship that might hold with his with this kind of this Chinese dynastic practice. I want to say song, but I'd probably be wrong there. I have a feeling it's later.
Yeah, and this getting back to like this pixelation and this grittiness too, like as an immigrant, or a refugee coming to the States, as if your memory, your sense of home is slowly becoming a distant memory, but also how do you preserve that as well? And I think, which is really clever with this photograph, and this is Han in the background, sitting in the chair, is there's this documentation of this documentation happening simultaneously in this one photograph.
I love that too. It pays homage to his use of photographic images as his source material, but doesn't it bring us back to the Honoré Daumier, Kilolo?
Right, yes.
Just
Yes.
that sense that our cell phones
Yes,
are such a medium for, they're kind of like virtual galleries that we hold in the palm of our hand.
absolutely. And then also like his phone is in this landscape mode too. And it kind of mirrors, this New York skyline too. That was something else that I kind of, there was this thread happening between this print and then this photograph. So, all right. And then the last image, you brought this to my attention, Charlotte. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a lithograph by him where he is exploring his Chinese heritage. He tried to return to China, and he built a studio, and then the Chinese state took it away from him. They wanted to build a hotel to attract the tourist industry to the area that he had sought to settle in. So he was pushed out and migrates to Taiwan and has moved between that and New York. So I think he's constantly confronting the intersection of East and West, these different continents, these different countries. But I love how he kind of brings this is Chinese currency, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's rubbing it. So, there's also the notion of grave rubbing and, kind of calling that memory onto the paper.
Right. Yeah. And that this is what oil ink roller rubbing on Tyvek paper. That material. Yeah. And it's huge. It's pretty, it's a long scroll. So, all right. So I'm going to stop sharing and back to gallery mode. Hello, everybody. I see there's some, there's some interesting comments. Laura had put a link in the chat and said, a nice article, Men Behaving Badly, Can We Separate Art from Artists? And Laura, can you speak a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to say that I loved your perspective and how awesome it is to have two women, art historians, curators, talking about the collection from a female perspective. That was something that in the 1980s I did not have in my educational experience at IUP or even much at Kent State and when I got my MFA. So these are just two really good links. One is an article about great artists who have had horribly misogynistic behaviors towards women and their subjects. And I came across this article recently. And in the context of what we were talking about, Mel Ramos and Picasso, the violence towards women, the misogyny that was just so extreme, trying to destroy women's lives and careers. That's the kind of thing that for you young folks who are in college now, that's the kind of things, those are the kinds of perspectives many of us of my generation never heard. And then the John Berger video on YouTube, you can now get all three of his original 1970s videos that the Ways of Seeing book was based on. And the video number 2 is about how we as artists and art historians have failed to ignore what the female perspective is of all the women who are sexualized for men's use and men's pleasure historically in art. They're just fabulous videos, and it was related to your first 2 discussions. So I wanted to share those because they're great resources.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to go to YouTube and watch that. Yeah, John Berger. I mean, he passed away, what, a couple years ago?
Yeah,
not
just
too-
recently. Oh, broke my
Yeah, I
heart.
know. Ways of Seeing, that's like the Bible.
Yeah, so Kamala, you're saying that's like the Bible. And for the students who are present, I would like to share, because you probably aren't aware, with Kenneth Clark, the great art historian who had this great video series called Civilization. And he said that the female nude is the epitome of the form of Western art. So for men, that might be the case, but certainly not for all of the teenage female models who were used for it. And the John Berger book, if you haven't read it, young art students, if you haven't read the John Berger tiny little book, Ways of Seeing, which is just fabulous. That is the voice that went up against the authority of Kenneth Clark to say, hey, you know what? That's really not the way it is. And half the population doesn't agree with you on this. So let's take a look and see what women really think. So for art students, I would encourage you to either watch that video or just purchase the tiny little John Berger book. And I'll stop now.
No, great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And Lisa, I see you put in the chat the salon show, much like last year's All Show at Erie Art Museum.
Are you talking about that installation that just kind of went from the floor to the ceiling? I thought that was fascinating.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I didn't see it.
I'm going to let Dr. Wellman describe it.
Well, it was an attempt to cull the collection, to excavate and bring works from the storage area up to the ground floor. And so you stand in the middle of a space that is basically, you are enveloped by works drawn from the permanent collection that is all too often banished to storage. And so you can it's kind of like the history of the museum in a capsule in a certain way. Lisa, you would probably have other perspectives to offer, but I thought that was a fascinating strategy to
Gosh,
look
what if
at works that never would have made it to the walls. And then
what if other institutions did that, practice that type of, way of displaying, even if it's, just a temporary kind of show?
yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I was.
Hi, Anthony.
Hi, guys. I was curious about the first one that was brought up relative to the redo of Monet. I was.
Mel Ramos.
Yeah. I was curious because the way in the newer version, how the yellow is placed on top of the black figure, the relationship between the flower and the figure in that versus the others seems very different. In the newer, I feel like the way the color is being used, it's almost giving that character, well, that figure more attention than the woman lying down. I was just curious what you guys thought of that, like how that's playing in versus the original, because in the original, I feel the way the flowers are working, I mean, it's
Mhm.
very foreign from the figure, but in the other one, it seems very connected. And I feel like it's giving a different tone to, you know, this lost figure in the Monet and in the newer version.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complementary color. It plays against the blues of the of Laura's dress, picks up the yellow of Olympia's shoe. The flowers in the Mel Ramos are baser blooms than the rather more upper crusty, more expensive bouquet. I was always taught that the Monet was a kind of a symphony of whites,
Mm.
and that the red explosive accent in the bouquet um, contrasted sharply with the variation of white accents that completely control that composition, from the kind of warmer silk of the Japanese shawl she's lying on to the crisp, almost rosy folds of Laura's dress, as I recall. And then, you know, this kind of star, what are they called? I want to say star anemones, but I don't think that's what it is. The flowers that look almost like they're little firecrackers that are in the Manet bouquet. Such a crisp white. So there's a kind of a sacrifice of that kind of elegant aesthetic that Manet employs to the kind of cheaper color swatches that you'd use to determine how you're going to decorate your living room, which is operative in the Mel Ramos. It kind of takes it down to a kind of more middle class interior decoration. I don't know. How do you come at that, Kalolo?
That's like an interesting way. I mean, Anthony, your observation I find really interesting. You know, you're talking about yellows and you know, I look at the bouquet that Ramos has you know, created, and it's like these kind of wild flowers that almost as if somebody had handpicked them and wrapped them into the cellophane and, you know, gave them and to be presented. That's kind of like how I see it. Um, you know, and yeah, and so, and even that the woman reclining doesn't even have, there's no flower, there's, you know, she, you know, it almost like, I don't know if she has a watch on or not, I don't recall, but she does have a bracelet or
Yeah,
some type of,
it
is
was
it,
like she has like gold wristbands, I think, on her ankles too. But I was interested because the way the yellow backs to that too only exemplifies that yellow on the in the flowers more. So it's
right, and even her slippers too,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, her mules, excuse me, her mules.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for your observation, Anthony. And I know that in the interest of time, we have to wrap up because it's close to 6:30. And I knew that, you know, we could go on, Charlotte. But I just want to thank you so much. This has just been such a joy to be in conversation with you and to learn more from the community where you all are living, because you know, I'm always saying because of COVID, I can't come out to visit you all, but I really look forward to coming out to Edinburgh, um, you know, when I'm able to. But I do just want to thank everybody for joining us. And once again, you can check out the Bruce Gallery online. It's brucegallery.info. And we will have 4 other events happening every other Wednesday. And that stay tuned for more information about the upcoming events. I know one will be, we're going to be in conversation with Ed Eberly, which is going to be fantastic. And we're going to have like a studio visit with Ed Eberly in his studio in Homestead. So I really look forward to being in conversation with him and a student in the ceramics department at Edinburgh. Is that right, Lisa? You were sharing with me earlier today, which
Yes,
is
Talon Smith, who's one of the graduate students, is very excited to be able to help out that night.
yeah, I look forward to that. Anytime, you know, I can be, you know, engaging with younger people and connecting with an older generation of artists, I just think it's just really fantastic. So that's all I have to share. Charlotte, do you have any parting words?
I hope that we can have secret Zoom meetings where we can have more illuminating conversations, Kilolo.
Great. All right. Thank you. So I just want to say thanks again for everybody for joining us, and have a good evening, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.